In this example, we have a circuit that has a 12-volt power source, a fuse, and 3 resistors that are drawn there in the diagram. And the questions are, which fuse should be used? A 2-amp fuse, a 4-amp fuse, or a 6-amp fuse? And how much power will the circuit draw? Now, in order to answer these questions, we're going to have to figure out the current. After all, it's the current that determines the kind of fuse that you're going to use, and we can also relate current to power. So we have to figure out the current. Now, to figure out the current, we're going to have to figure out the effective resistance of all 3 of those resistors. To do that, we have to realize that these resistors are hooked up in parallel. We know this because the current has a choice. It can either go through the 9-ohm resistor, the 15-ohm resistor, or the 8-ohm resistor. It can't go through 2 of them or 3 of them. It can only go through 1 of them. That means they're hooked up in parallel. When resistors are hooked up in parallel, their effective resistance is calculated as 1 over R effective equals 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2 plus 1 over R3. So 1 over R effective is 1 over 9.0 ohms plus 1 over 15 ohms plus 1 over 8 ohms. Now remember, we have to add these as decimals, so we'll convert each one of those to decimals and then add them. And when we do that, we find that 1 over R effective is 0.301 over ohms. To get R effective, we take the inverse of each side. 1 over R effective is R effective. 1 over 0.30 is 3.3. And 1 over ohms is ohms. So this entire circuit can be replaced by a circuit that has a single resistor whose value is 3.3 ohms. Now calculating the current is really easy. We remember that twinkle twinkle little star voltage equals I times R. Voltage is 12 volts. We don't know the current, but we do know the resistance, 3.3 ohms. When we solve for current, we find that current is 12 volts over 3.3 ohms, or 3.6 volts per ohm. A volt per ohm is an amp, so 3.6 amps. Well, if the current is 3.6 amps, you should use the 4-amp fuse. The 2-amp fuse would blow, and the 6-amp fuse would allow for too much current. You only need 3.6 amps, so there's no reason to allow for 6. We'll use the 4-amp fuse. That will allow for the current that the circuit should draw, and not a lot more. Okay, well there's still one more question to answer, and that's how much power will the circuit draw? Well, now that we know the current, that's an easy question to answer. Power is the current times the voltage. We just calculated the current, 3.6 amps, and we know the voltage, 12 volts. So the power is 43 amp volts, which is the same thing as a watt. So the circuit draws 43 watts.